The reason why I'm saying this is that very often, and I don't know about you, but very often when I come and start working on a project, I realize that I'm not seen as enabler. I'm not seen as helper. I'm not seen as this wonderful, beautiful human being that comes in to make the world better, makes the company better, and help people remove mistakes and remove friction and all of that. I'm being seen as a disruptor. Very often I'm being blocked. Very often I have to defend myself. Very often I have to argue about what the hell I'm doing. Very often why I'm doing and why am I not doing it this way or the other way. Does anybody feel the same way? Please write a plus in the chat. If your manager happens to be in there in the room, maybe you don't have to, but this is my world, right? So for the last 3 years, I've been working for the last 9 years now, I've been working pretty much as a consultant, as a designer, but usually I don't like the word consultant because I actually get in hands-on in Figma and we just basically move pixels around, we design the flows and all of that. It's not like writing reports and stuff. And for the last 3 years, I've been working with the European Parliament. The European Parliament is a little organization that has around 199 different websites. And the big ambition is to bring all of it under one umbrella in one single unified design. Well, when I walk in an organization like this, and when you have, let's say, I don't know, tens of thousands of people whose work will be potentially disrupted by me moving pixels around, by me renaming things, by me deleting things, by me relabeling things, it's no wonder that you're going to be seen as a foe, as an enemy, and not a friend. So this brings me here, because every time I walk in a company organization like this, I have to show that I made an impact. I really have to show it. So you cannot just say, oh, well, I'm a designer, I know what to do. I'm going to move pixels around and still the same screen. Don't worry. It's not like it's frozen or something. But I always have to be very strategic and very cautious about where we were before, where we ended up later, and what is it that we actually did along the way, right? And that brought me to this notion of kind of needing actually to measure UX and measure design impact as well. Does that make sense, everyone? This is kind of where I'm coming in. Basically, from a lot of frustration, from a lot of, I guess, sadness every now and again with work, where you have to really prove almost everything. Now, European Parliament is a wonderful environment because I was given the freedom to do research and talk to users and all that, but very often it's not like that at all. So what do I want to talk to you about today? And what do I want to highlight? Well, basically, I want to understand how can we not, I'm not talking about taking a seat at the table. I don't care about this stuff. I talk about really creating some sort of meaningful impact in organizations, small and large. And so when I look at it, I think about it from very different perspectives. I think about the impact that we're producing. I think about what can we measure as designers in the first place, right? Then also at the same time, is there anything that we can report up to senior management, like key performance indicators in terms of design? What would that be? And then if we actually define some of those design KPIs, key performance indicators, then maybe we can visualize the overall impact that different design teams do on it, right? And also one thing that has kind of become very important is that very often design teams don't have a definition of success. And sometimes you end up in situations where a team, oh, sorry, let me go back for a second. Hold on. When a team almost feels like the success for a design team is the velocity in terms of completed Jira tickets per month. Really? Is this the definition of design success? Should we be a little bit more ambitious than that? So let's break it down. And I hope that by the end of the session, you will get to kind of a better understanding about how I approach things. It doesn't mean it's going to work for you like that, right? But you will kind of see how you can maybe even apply something like that in an organization that is a little bit reluctant maybe to adopt some of the good UX practices, good design practices, or understand the value of design, right? So let's start from the start then. My father always told me, if you don't know where to start, you start from the start. So we start from the start. Okay, that sounds silly, but that's how it is, right? So you are a designer. And when I think of you, and when I look, and I see only George right now, but I think of all of you are incredible designers, right? Fantastic designers, wonderful designers. You are great at what you do. So where do you make impact actually? Well, many of you might have seen this before. This is a wonderful visualization of the 5 layers of user experience by Jason James Garrett back from 2005 or 6 or something. It's very, very old. And in many ways, when we think about UX, many companies see UX like this. There are 5 different facets of it, if you like, ranging from very concrete on the top to very abstract at the bottom. All of them are considered to be UX. So when somebody asks you, what do you do for a living as a UX designer? Well, that's usually what we're all doing. Now, some of us might be doing a little bit more of one thing, a little bit less of the other thing, right? But most of the time, this is all UX, living on the 5 S's, right? The surface, the skeleton, the structure, the scope, the strategy. And of course, when we're looking, designing in Figma, moving pixels around, we are living over here, thinking about information architecture and the way of how we like content design, how we place things on a page, interaction, accessibility, right? This is where we are. Then eventually we're getting to the point where we need to think about functions and content requirements there. That's kind of more scoping, right? UX strategy is also there. And then we're getting to this point, which is where business and user needs are. Right, we need to be a bit more strategic about our decisions as we are moving forward in UX. Many of you are familiar with this. Of course, when we're speaking about measurements, we're probably going to be somewhere over here. So inherently, and that's important, inherently, UX metrics are connected with the strategy. So if you're not planning for anything, and if you just basically retrofitting things or you're reacting to whatever comes your way, then that's not necessarily strategy, and that's very difficult to measure. There is a different way to look at it, and this is the one that I prefer more, actually. This is coming from Jamie Mill, which is called The Elements of Product Design, and I really find it real. I mean, really real. Because on the bottom here, we have this messy, complex, contradictory, evolving, and not fully knowable world, right? This is the reality that we're dealing with. Eventually, as designers, we try to map this reality into some sort of a problem space where we try to figure out the right user needs, to kind of observe behavior. If you jump in a particular domain which you don't understand at all at first, like healthcare or law, legal, or insurance or anything, you have to understand the concept in that domain, the vocabulary of that domain. So kind of mapping this messy reality into some problem space. And then once we have a problem space well defined, right, then we look into solution space where we try to think about the obviously eventually visual layer right here, but also conceptual layer, the relationships, the objects, the actions, the systems involved, and so on. And then eventually also these interactions right here, flows and stuff like that. So that for me feels a little bit closer, I would say. So the issue with that is if we, of course, don't map the reality well enough, which is, of course, the function of research here, right? Then, of course, the solution we invent they might be good solutions for very wrong problems. Or we might have very bad solutions for very good problems, right? So this is kind of this mapping, the connection is actually very, very important. Now you might wonder, so why am I talking about this now? That seems like not totally disconnected. Well, the thing is, when we're trying to measure anything, right? If you get it wrong over here, you'll be measuring just the wrong things. Potentially you'll be measuring things that have no impact on business at all. So what's then a point of measurement? Because if you do measure, you become accountable. And if you do become accountable, then working on the wrong thing is bad for you. It doesn't make you look good, right? So I have to be very careful in this mapping and this translation before you even start measuring anything. So if you realize that we don't do any research in our team, then measuring is not necessarily going to help you, right? Because you basically will be operating on hunches, and every time you kind of bring something to life and you measure it, you will see something moving here, something moving there. It's not really strategic. So if this is wrong, then this will be wrong as well. If this is right, it doesn't mean that this is going to be wrong, right? But this is where you kind of have to do all the good work over here and over here. Okay, I don't think any surprises here, and sorry, it's probably the most boring part of everything, but this is our life as UX designers. Make sense, everyone? Please confirm me with a very affirmative plus in the chat. I got 2 pluses from Dennis and 3 pluses from Dean. That's fantastic. And and a lot of pluses from Eric. Wow, I don't know what I did with that, but here we go, right? So let's move on from there. So when you start working in any organization with any company, you realize that they have these beautiful artifacts like this. Beautiful org charts, which kind of show you this entire structure of the organization. And this is great. And this is pretty much the very first thing that I ask for when I start working on anything. The very first thing I'm going to ask for is, please give me your org chart. Now, the reason for that is because I want to understand relationships. I want to understand dependencies. And one more thing that's really, really important. Remember what I said in the very beginning. If I'm working somewhere over here, and I've been hired by maybe a manager in this department, this unit over there, right? By default, and just to be perfectly honest, right? By default, I always assumed that if I'm a good designer, And if I produce good design work, right, of course people will notice, and of course people will appreciate, and they will, bring me to for the entire organization, and they will actually move that design forward for the entire company, the entire organization on my behalf, because I'm doing the good work, right? Because I'm empathizing with them, because I'm helping them, I'm reducing friction and all that. Now, that never happened to me, ever. In fact, the default behavior that I should be expecting on a higher level, right, is to block me. Now, why am I talking about this now? Well, if I'm living over here and I'm reporting maybe to that person, but that person is going to block me because they don't understand what I'm doing or they don't care or whatever, right? Then I have no chance to make any impact at scale at all, right? So I need to know exactly who I'm reporting to and what their goals are, right? But more importantly, by looking at the org chart, I can maybe identify some people who desperately care about, well, not desperately, but who sincerely care about UX. And they would love to support my efforts as a UX designer if they only know that I existed. But if I'm locked right here in isolation, in a silo, and I'm reporting to this person over here, and the other organization has no idea about me, there is no chance to make a significant impact at all. And I find it actually quite ironic, because while most of the time the organization, presents itself like this, in reality, it's more like this. It's chaos, organized chaos, less organized chaos, chaotic chaos, well-documented chaos, but it's usually chaos. Things move, things change, new dependencies, new priorities, organization efforts, consolidation projects, all of that. And then all of a sudden, everything is moving. Everything is constantly moving, right? This is more real again. So despite all of that, there are 5 things that every business cares about. Actually, 6. Actually, 6. The 5 most important things are: every business wants to increase revenue, decrease costs, increase new business, increase existing business, and also increase shareholder value. Right? Now, it also feels, of course, a bit weird. Like, how can you're just maybe working on filters or some navigation flows here and there. How can you increase shareholder value as a result of that? Well, that's very difficult to connect. That's very difficult to make a case for that, right? But you can usually make a strong case, of the good value of UX by decreasing costs and increasing revenue. That's something that's much easier to show. Because most of the time, good accessibility, good UX means that more people can do the thing that they want to do, right? That means usually fewer costs or fewer costs in customer service, customer support, service desk inquiries and stuff like that, and potentially also higher revenue, mostly due to higher conversion, right? There's just one more thing that's really important that I always try to tap into, and that's most businesses want to do more of things that worked in the past, right? And most businesses want to reduce risk as much as they can. And to me personally, good accessibility and good UX, just good design basically, is a great, fantastic tool to reduce risk or to manage risk or to mitigate risk or whatever you want to call it. And so when I speak about design, when I walk in this big room to present whatever work I'm doing, I'm very cautious and very careful about the language that I'm using, right? And most of the time, I will be speaking about reducing risk, mitigating risks, decreasing costs, or increasing revenue, not necessarily about building empathy, right? And we will get to that in a moment, right? There is this wonderful article, a fantastic article by Paul Adams, in which he's speaking about the end of navel gazing. And Paul Adams is the chief product officer at Intercom, a fantastic company, I believe also from Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. I love Intercom, I really do. So what I really loved about this article, it actually kind of said something that I strongly believed for a very long time. And then he said basically in this article that, well, when we look at LinkedIn and we looked on X and we look at whatever, everything, newsletters and so on, we usually see this. UX is the heart of everything. I mean, without UX, there is nothing, right? The UX is this magical glue that connects the business, the design, the technology, and everything in one. I mean, look at us. We are literally in the center of the universe. Who are they and what are they without us, right? UX, or UX is everything. Well, the truth is, it couldn't be further from the truth. Because most of the time, most organizations, I wouldn't say they don't care about the UX. They just don't value it enough. Because most of them are structured this way. Have leadership. Strong leadership, flat leadership, kind of top-down leadership, very hierarchical leadership, whatever you want to call it, there is always some sort of leadership, right? And there are satellites circling around leadership. Very different satellites, sales, support, very different functions, recruiting, finance, HR, analytics, engineering, design, research. Oh, that's us. Look at us. That's us. Design, research, maybe also PM, right? Business operations, marketing. And here we go, right? Now, when we look at them, we see that not all of them have equal weight because there is good reason. And I mean, this is something that I learned too late in my career, I think. Because I really didn't understand the connection, right? Because if you think about a company where you're working today, if you have a ratio of 1 designer to 300 engineers, or you have a ratio of 5 designers to 300 engineers, or 20 designers to 300 engineers, or even more, these are all representing the priorities of the organization and how they see design. And I'm not saying that you should have 300 designers and 300 engineers. That's probably not going to work anyway, right? But the ratio, there is a huge difference between 1 to 300 and 50 to 300 or 20 to 300. There are massive differences in between. The reason why I pointed out now, because most of the time, other functions, unlike design, are really great at visualizing their impact. They're really great at visualizing what is it that they're doing for a living, right? So sales reports directly to leadership. There is a very strong connection between sales and leadership. They're very, very good at visualizing what the hell they're doing. The same goes for marketing. Traffic, things like that are always very prominently visible to leadership, right? This also goes for other things like finance and HR and recruiting probably, and maybe also even support or business operations for sure, right? But then when it comes to design and research, we rarely report like specific design related key performance indicators that end up on management dashboards. Well, sales do that all the time. And this is why no wonder they're seen as very, very important that directly contribute to the success of leadership. But it's not very clear what designers are doing because we need design, but how many designers do we need? And what is exactly the impact that they're producing actually? This is always a struggle that we find. And it's also connected to something a little bit different because the way of how we're speaking and the way of how the business speaks are really drastically different, right? So we have on the one hand, business language, which is all war-alike terms like destroy the competition, fight for market share, target customers, capture the mind share, conquer the market, convert and follow up people. I mean, why would you convert people? Just let them be for a moment. Employing a sales force, hiring headhunters, picking battles, attracting more eyeballs. Oof, horrible, increasing lifetime value. And then we come in the room and we present our beautiful designs. And we talk about, let's reduce friction, like beautiful, elegant butterfly coming in the room, right? Let's reduce friction. Well, there is nothing about reduction of friction. If anything, we increase friction because we fight, we destroy, we target, we capture, we conquer. We don't reduce friction. Empowering users, enabling people, bridging the gap, user-friendly customer service. We're not servicing anything over here, like at all, right? And then also terms that many business people just don't get. What do you mean develop empathy? You either have empathy for something or not. How do you like develop empathy? What does it mean? So there's a big, big, big gap in between. So when I walk in the room, I cannot speak the business language because that's not me. But I also don't speak the UX language because it doesn't fit in the context. What I try to do is speak through the language of my metrics, design design KPIs, where I basically say, well, we refined and adjusted or regrouped or something filters, right? And so as a result of that, we saw that the time people need to complete 5 most frequently used filters reduced by 2%, 5%, 6%. And in the end, also the error rates reduced by 7%. That's the language that I'm using, right? And so it's kind of a little bit further away from UX and a little bit definitely far away from business, right? But at least it kind of explains to the business basically what the hell I'm actually doing. Does it make sense, everyone? This is kind of my angle where I'm coming in, trying to bridge the gap in between, right? Okay, so but what does it mean? So we have this sort of metrics and stuff, but then how does it work together? Well, when you think about metrics we can be using, there is plenty of them. There are certain things that businesses measure, and we can tap into them. These are the ones that you will usually find on the business dashboard somewhere, right? You have behavioral metrics, diagnostic metrics, and business metrics, right? Now, the diagnostic metrics are obviously great, right? So if you have a high system uptime, that's good. If people are using features that you produced, that's great, right? If you have a high ticket resolution, well, low ticket resolution time, so it doesn't take much time to resolve tickets, that's great. If you don't have any security issues, that's great as well. So this is objectively good to have. So if you have a pretty decent numbers over there, that's great. That's also a part of user experience, right? Because if you have failures all the time, errors, security issues in something, people just don't have trust in your product, in your system, right? So, but this is usually that business is aware of. That's usually reported by engineering teams and data analytics, data scientists and stuff like that. On the other hand, we have this stuff here. They somehow do land on business dashboards somewhere. This would be things like click-through rate, bounce rate, session duration, traffic growth, and drop-off rate. And when I talk about them, I always feel a little bit weird because, so if you have, let's say, a session duration of 2 minutes 42 seconds, so what? So what does it mean? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? So we reduce the session duration by 10%. So what is the good thing or is it the bad thing? Because if you have a particular length of a session duration, it doesn't represent success. I want something that represents design success, right? And in here, you have the session duration of 242. Well, if you reduce it by 10%, maybe that's great because people find what they're looking for faster. Well, maybe that's bad because people don't stay around and they don't use the product as much as they should be, right? For me, this is not very helpful. Like session duration, I can't do anything with it. The same goes for traffic growth. I don't care about traffic growth. Okay, that sounds weird. What do you mean? Well, you can always grow traffic. What's more important than traffic growth is the quality of traffic. It must be traffic that converts. If you run a big campaign on LinkedIn and on Facebook and whatever, Google and so on, you will bring some traffic and traffic will grow, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be good traffic, traffic that converts. The same goes for, newsletter lists, right? Newsletter lists can grow if you just throw in pop-ups everywhere, right? But will it be good emails that you basically can convert into or not? This is way more important. So CTR, yes, CTR is important, but overall, hard. It's very difficult for me to read anything meaningful from it. On the other hand, you have business metrics over here, and these are things that are very business related and very close to business, right? But apparently, business people really like abbreviations and mostly consonants and not vocals. MRR, IRR, CLTV, ACV, and so on and so forth. All these abbreviations you probably have heard before, right? Some of them are closer to user experience, which is the customer satisfaction score, CSAT. Many organizations are very much aware of that. On the other hand, almost every business I've been working with measures NPS, or Net Promoter Score. It's not the only thing that they measure, but that's definitely one of the many things that they measure. So please write a plus in the chat if you know or assume that your organization or company measures NPS. Anyone? Maybe, maybe not. Well, if you ask around, chances are high that they do, right? And this is actually quite important because this is a bridge that we can use to argue about UX. Now, why am I talking about, why do I talk about it this way? Well, because most of the time when you speak about NPS, and it's kind of important to spend maybe like 2 minutes on it, NPS is this really weird and unreliable and fragile and gameable metric, which basically breaks down the sentiment of users into detractors, passives, and promoters. And the way it works is by sending a survey that looks like this. How likely are you to recommend a product to a colleague or friend on a scale from 0 to 10, so 11-point scale, from not likely being 0 and very likely being 10, right? And the way of how NPS actually works under the hood is, well, it breaks down all of the answers into buckets. So anything that goes between 0 and 6 is considered to be a detractor, anything that's 7 and 8 is passives, and anything that's 9 and 10 is a promoter. Now, in other words, detractors are people who hate you, passives are people who couldn't care less about you, and promoters are people who, for some reason, actually like you, right? There are usually not that many of those, right? So here we are. That means, though, if you actually send that survey, well, in a bad case, you get this, right? You get maybe, I don't know, 8 people, detractors, who are really hating you desperately with a 0, giving you a 0 instead of 10, right? And 2 people give you 1. So that means that you have 10 scores, right? The average would be 0.2, but the NPS works very simply by calculating the difference between the people who do recommend you, people who do not recommend you. Pretty much like this. NPS is a percentage of promoters, that's 9 and 10s, minus the percentage of detractors being 0 and 6. Passives I ignored because why not, right? Sure. So if you calculate it here, you get 0% of people promote you, and then 100% of people dislike you, so you get minus 100. Okay, very simple math here. Which means that if you and your design team spend a ridiculous amount of time trying to get better, and you do get better, and all of a sudden you run this survey and you get, maybe more 5s and maybe a few more 6, well, the NPS score is still the same. It's still minus 100 because there are 0% of people who promote you and 100% of people who don't like you, so you got minus 100 still, right? In fact, it's only when you actually move from the red zone into the yellow zone, right, where you actually get to NPS 0. But even if you work hard and you move from 7 to 8, you still get 0, right? And it's only when you all of a sudden move to 9 where you get all the way plus 100. It's a very strange metric, and in many ways it's unreliable unless you get a lot of people. Now, the reason why I talk so much about it is because it's really something that businesses measure. And there are a few things that you need to know when you argue about the value of UX or the work that you're doing and the impact of what you're doing. It's really impossible, almost impossible, to show the impact between here and here, right, by basically just using NPS. That's just not going to work. So if your company says, well, we measure NPS already, that's okay, that's good enough. Well, you can explain, well, it isn't, because we've done a lot of work between here and here, and it's not visible. It kind of hides the UX success behind, NPS, right? So you need to know two things about it. First, the assumptions are quite difficult within NPS because 52% of people who actively discourage others from using a brand had also actively recommended it for a particular attribute. Some people can't stand some brands, but use them due to their low prices. The best example of that being Ryanair. Everybody loves to hate Ryanair, but people do fly Ryanair, and Ryanair is extremely successful, right? But it's one thing that people are saying, and the other thing is what they're doing and what they're thinking. Also interesting, and these two things are always something that I bring up to the senior management so they understand how NPS works under the hood. The other thing is that 55% of promoters, mostly 9s and 10s, actually do recommend the products. It's only half of people who say that they recommend actually recommend. But you need a lot of people for it to be statistically significant. So if somebody comes in and says, well, we send out a survey, we have 15 responses, so NPS got better, that doesn't mean anything, right? You need at least 1,000 people for it to be statistically significant, which is a lot of people, right? Okay, so if NPS is so bad, why am I talking about this? Well, we could be talking about CSAT. This is CSAT. Overall, how satisfied are you with the product? Not at all. Very satisfied. CSAT, called Customer Satisfaction Survey. If you actually go, leave security at the airport, kind of have this smileys, that's a different variant of the same story, right? Kind of get this, very satisfied, very unsatisfied. And CSAT score is a percentage of 4s and 5s. Okay, so these are the two things that business desperately cares about. However, right, the reason why I bring this up is because many of the design metrics that I'm using, and this is my toolbox, can be mapped towards NPS. So there is a correlation by good UX of good UX and NPS. Unfortunately, I guess, because I really desperately hate NPS. So if your business cares about NPS, if you improve UX, NPS will always go up, right? There is a quite strong relationship between them. However, that requires that you actually know what you're doing with NPS surveys. If you send it to 10 people, it will fluctuate like there is no tomorrow. But if you send it to a couple of hundreds of people, thousands of people, then it will get better. It will get better. And I will show you proof of that in a moment, right? So on the other hand, okay, hold on, let me just pause for a second. Breathe. Does it make sense, everyone? I mean, George, I can go like this forever. I have like, what, 3,000 slides here, right? But I want to show maybe just in 15 more minutes, just show a couple of things to build up the case to show you the kind of the end result of this story, right? Okay, great. Thank you so much for feedback, everyone. So on the designer side of things, this is what I usually measure. If I have access to users, I would always go for the same thing. I would go to the customers, to users, and try to check what they're doing. right? And ideally, I would be kind of trying to identify something like maybe 10 to 12, maybe 15 representative tasks that they have to perform almost every day. Like, this is something that probably the first question I would be asking the business. So what do people supposed to do here? Like, what is it that they're supposed to do? What are the key journeys that they're going to take? What is the key purpose or the key function or feature or functionality of the product that we're serving here? What is the end goal, right? And we can also break it down and see what are this kind of customer journeys that they take most of the time. And my job most of the time is not to, I don't know, improve buttons or whatever, but obviously as a UX designer, my job is to do always the same. My job is to improve success rate for these tasks, to reduce time that people waste, I should say, on the task, to reduce error rates and increase error recovery rate. Now, usually I would go with at least these two for 12 or 15 representative tasks. I want people to be successful, and I want people to be successful faster. That's the most important thing that I care about, right? On the other hand, if it's something that requires processing, or maybe you have forms or something similar, then I'll probably be looking into how often people make mistakes or errors. On the other hand, if we're working on search, I'll be looking at search quality score. Search quality score is very simple. We basically look at how search is performing in terms of UX. So we go in and we ask, can you give us a list of 100 search queries, top 100 search queries that came our way last year, in the last 12 months? So they give us the list. And then we see what appears in top 3 or top 5 results for today using that search engine of ours, right? It doesn't have to be in a global level. It could also be on a level of particular vertical in a team, right? Product team, right? So we get this list and we actually have this 3 to 5 URLs for each of these queries. Okay, so then we go to editorial teams or teams that are responsible for different domains and different topics that are being searched, right? And we ask, so what should be there? So when people are searching for this and this and this and this, what should appear in top 5 or top 3? Top 3 is just easier because it's not that much. So they give us a list, and different teams give us different lists. So we end up with 100 search queries with 3 URLs for each query. And then for each of this query, we also get 3 URLs of what is supposed to be there. And then we do the mapping, looking at how many of the results that we actually received today are including at least one result from what is supposed to be there. And that gives you a search quality score. Sometimes you actually get to the point where you just track if at least 2 of the things that the editorial team has recommended are appearing in search results or not, right? And so this gives you kind of a representation, I guess, of your search quality. And then there are other things, like, for example, whenever you start working, like onboarding, right? Whenever somebody starts working on a particular product, we need to bring them to first success. We need to define what that first success means, right? That's important. But very often we need to bring them to that first success. You know, if it's a financial broker application or something, people are not necessarily interested in the entire market, but they want to have their portfolio in there, like in the system that they can track how the market is changing for them, like with relevance for them. So we need to understand how we can reduce the time to first success with importing things or with presets, with templates or anything similar, right? So these are behavioral metrics that I really, really, really prefer, like almost all the time. Now, the important part for me is to be very cautious about the goals and the targets. Because when you look at that success rate, most of the time, what you're aiming for is something like 80% success rate. Going beyond 80 is possible, but it's hard. Most products I've been working with have a success rate of around 50 to 60% for representative tasks. They encounter failures all the time as well. Eventually, they do get through success, but it goes through the hoops. They always struggle, right? So that's challenging. So ideally, you want to be close to 90%, but that's really, really hard to do. As of time on task, that depends, right? Sometimes if you're working for the bank, right, then you probably, if you have, let's say, to process mortgage applications, that will take maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, right? But if it's something that you just need to review to check if all the important details are there, it might take 30 seconds or 40 seconds. That's task dependent, right? But overall, we just need to understand what is it before we make a change and what is it after we make a change. So if you just track these two things, right, repeatedly, maybe every 6 to 8 months, depending on the velocity of the team. For these 12 or 15 representative journeys that are really crucial for the business, right? Then you understand that, oh, it was like this 6 months ago. We made some changes. Oh, it's like that now. So if these are key tasks that people are supposed to perform, well, then we're getting better. You can make a strong case. It was worse and now it's better. Does it make sense, everyone? It's really that simple. There is no magic there. You take 12 tasks, you see how well people are at performing those tasks, ideally in their own conditions, right? You see how much time they need, and I literally mean it. I take my old iPhone 5, and this is my countdown, my timer. When people start completing a task, I just click on a timer, and then I just measure the time. I can actually show you an example of that, so it feels a little bit more real. Right here, let me just move it over here. So this is one of the reports that I was writing. Let's see if I can find it. It's just a TPI, we call it task performance indicator. So here we go. So just to give you a sense about how this works. So this is a table that includes for 12 tasks that we have selected, right, for a specific project, right? We looked at 12 tasks of how people are performing there. We looked at people are looking at search or navigation first. The main goal was to improve navigation and search. And so we have average success rate for each task across all these users here. Now, altogether, you don't need more than 18 people. We invited 23 people. Some of them didn't appear, so we got nothing here, right? And so we got this data. And what you basically see in front of you here is the average time on task number 1 across all participants. Then also for participant number 1, you have, what was that? I think if they actually succeeded or failed, the time they needed and how much time they needed. Oh, sorry, where they started with search or with navigation, whether they were successful or not successful means 1 and failed means 0, and then the time they needed to complete their task, right? And so out of that, we get for each task success rate. For some of these tasks, we have success rate of 0%. For some of them, we have 90%. The total average success rate is now 46%. Of these people, like of all of the tasks that people are completing, they spent 1 minute 56, right? And 29% use navigation, 70% use search, while average SUS score is 52. I'll get to that in a second. That's very simple. That's a simple spreadsheet here, right here, right? And of course, for each of the participants, we also kept records to see what they're doing and kind of tracked, trying to identify some hints and things that they were actually performing, where they were succeeding or failing, right? But also, I'll always like to complement it with other things, like, for example, attitudinal metrics to get a sense about how easy a system is for them. One of those things that we could be using is CSAT, Customer Satisfaction Score, but there are also many others, right? Some of them are just very custom, depending on the task that you have at hand, right? And sometimes you also can use SUS. I like SUS. Some of you might have seen it. It's a very simple 10 items questionnaire. People can respond from strongly agree to strongly disagree, and an average score is 68. And SUS is a great leading indicator, which is also, and that's important, correlated with NPS. If you increase SUS score, you also increase NPS. I will show you an example of that in a second, right? And so basically what you get here is a couple of statements like this. I think I would like to use this website frequently. From 1 to 7, from 1 to 10, I'm not sure. Strongly disagree to strongly agree. I found the website unnecessarily complex. Strongly disagree, strongly agree. So basically ask people to complete their tasks, and then we ask them to complete that survey. 68 is a benchmark, it's an average, and it's a great idea to have an idea of how your best competitor is performing across this task, if you can do that, right? If you happen to be beyond 80, that's fantastic. That's really rare. That's great UX there. And if you happen to be below 50, that's getting pretty bad, right? And so here's a cruel, interesting thing. There was an interesting research paper that was published a couple of years ago by Lenny Putti-Iulianti. And the goal was to indicate that there is a correlation indeed between NPS and SUS. And so if you do get beyond 80, beyond 90, right here, right, kind of grade A, if you like, you do get to greener zone promoter as well, which has now been scientifically proven, right? So there is a correlation between SUS and NPS right there, right? But of course, this is not the only option. There are plenty of those. There is also SuperQ, which is actually a little bit different, but I mean, I just want to show it as an example. It's an 8 items questionnaire, right? And so it could look like this, where you basically check and track how well your website is performing, your product is performing, visibility, trust and credibility, appearance and loyalty, right? And question number 8 here is actually NPS right here. So it also kind of frames in it too. Now, the reason why I'm showing this now is because in the end, what you can do, right, what your team can do, right, to measure UX is very simple. Think about just a simple spreadsheet like this. That's all you need. Really, that's all you need. On the right, you find reference, right? This is our success rate. Whenever you get to 80%, that's considered to be good. Whenever we go beyond 90%, that's excellent. That's success rate right here. So imagine that you're working for an insurance maybe, and in there you have a couple of tasks that people have to perform, right? And so these are the tasks, and you basically track how successful people are in doing that without any errors or mistakes, ideally also measuring the time. That would be your, one thing. If your team works only on that section of the page or the product or whatever, you can think maybe let's track 5 to 6 tasks that we're doing here, right? And let's track how successful people are in that. But also typically you will have some tasks that are locally measured, like that your design team is measuring, but you also need some overarching global tasks that people need to perform well at. That's usually onboarding, that's usually maybe checkout, things like that, because people don't just check out. They need to find the product and so on and so forth, right? So it's kind of this entire journey. So usually you would have maybe 4 to 5 local things, like local journeys that you're going to measure, and also then global journeys that you're going to measure, probably also 4 to 5. And that maybe you can do once every 2, 3, 4 months, depending on the size of the team, velocity of the team, and so on. With 18 people, you don't need more than that, right? And I think I see a question here in the chat from Pravin. I'll just get to you in just a second. On the other hand, what I would also do is to maybe throw up a little pop-up every now and again. Say, hey, how easy was it to do after completing a certain task? Or maybe on the confirmation page, right? You can do it here and here and here. Just ask people, how easy was it to do on a scale from 1 to 5? So you get something there. And potentially, you can also run a survey or email, send an email or something where you just ask 2 questions, which is called UX Lite metric. It's just 2 statements that you can agree or disagree with. The system's capabilities meet my requirements. That's question number 1. Question number 2, the system is easy to use. So if you use that one, you might not need this one, right? But you might want to complement them just to be sure that you're actually looking at data from different angles as well. And that's already gives you good enough first approach to measure UX in your team. That's all you need. Really, that's really all you need, right? You can of course go further, and that's just 2 more things I want to show you before I wrap up, because some teams are are going kind of in an advanced mode, and they're using something that's called UEQ, or user experience questionnaire. It's widely used. It's free, right? You can just go ahead and use it right away. It comes with a nice tooling as well, Excel spreadsheets, and then like it's available in 30 languages. It's great. It's great, but it's really, 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 really complex and advanced. So this is the sort of survey that you get. You get 30, I believe, or something, questions or statements where you can map across, pretty much the user experience across very different, attributes, if you like. And then once you input the data, it gets you this visualization about how you're doing in terms of attractiveness, novelty, stimulation, dependability, efficiency, and a few other things, right? So if you're working for a big corporation, well, maybe you will be doing that, right? If you're working for a small corporation or small company on your own, well, you can definitely do that. That's probably going to be enough. And very often, different teams will do the same thing across different smaller design teams. And then they will be collecting this data, success rate numbers or values or SUS score across very different verticals, and then normalize it to move up. So the management will then get one number, maybe 2 numbers, maybe 3 numbers, if we have 2, 3 important branches that are really, really critical for the product. And they will then show up on managers' dashboard. And that's great. That's fantastic. That's all I want, because most of the time it just doesn't happen. Now, finally, just to show you how it all fits together, right? I want to show you an example from a project I was working on here to kind of put it all in perspective, because it might seem, sure, we can do that. But this is something that I started doing recently. And I think in many ways, this is something that's really, really helps me to speak about, well, UX really better. So let me copy a link and send it to you so you can look at it at the same time. I hope you get access to it. Please write a plus in the chat if you do. I'm not sure if you can. I just pasted the link in the chat. Excellent, right? So what you see here in front of you is the so-called design KPI tree. Has anybody heard of design KPI trees before? No, no pluses. Minuses are accepted as well. That's for sure, right? So marketing teams, sales teams are very much familiar with KPI trees because they do this for a living. They have to kind of show impact that they are producing as well. And I basically stole it from them, right? This is what they do all the time. Sometimes you see it like representing itself as an opportunity map tree or something like that, right? Opportunity tree map, something, right? So it doesn't matter, right? But the point is this. Remember, I was talking about design KPIs and design metrics. Well, they are right here. These are these white boxes that you see here. So let me explain what it is first. Now, imagine you're working for a company, and a company maybe wants to sell washing machines, and they want to sell more washing machines, right? So what they ultimately want to do, maybe this is a business goal, they want to reduce time to purchase, maybe by 20%. And these green badges represent business metrics or business KPIs. Okay, so in this case, they want to reduce time to purchase, and this is deeply connected with revenue. Okay, now then I come in and say, okay, so a company wants to sell more washing machines. So what UX or design related statement will represent this business goal that I can deal with? Well, if we want people to buy faster, what does it mean? Well, the way of how I see it and how I translate it, actively translate it, is customers should faster recognize the value of our products and be able to make best fit choices, because then they might be more likely to buy. That's how I translate it. I have a meeting with my stakeholders and say, well, all my business people who hire me and say, so this is how we see it as a UX team. Does it make sense? Are we missing something here? Very short meeting, 15 minutes long. Yeah, maybe yes, but we don't know. Do we have any research or anything? Maybe, but that seems to be about right. Okay. Okay. Then I kind of come back and I maybe refine and refine and refine. And I really have to be very clear that this translation from the business goal to something like a design initiative is very, very straightforward. So in the end, they say, okay, that seems to be right. Right. And then I start breaking it down, usually with a business analyst. When I sit down and think, okay, so people need to be able to buy faster. Now, what must occur for them to be able to buy faster? Now, the checkout is great, so it's not a problem here. So what must occur? Well, they must be able to make a final decision faster, to buy or not to buy. Because if they haven't made a decision at all, they will not buy for sure. So I break it down. And that has an impact on the customer lifetime value. Okay, so how do I help them make a decision faster? Well, this is a design KPI tree, but it doesn't mean that it needs to include only design activities. So this one came from marketing. Said, well, if we can get more people to recommend our product to more people, that will probably help. Oh, that's great. That's good to know. I mean, design or UX KPIs or user experience KPIs is more of a holistic experience metrics for me. It's not just visual design or interaction design. It's kind of the big capital letter D design, right? But then what else could happen? Well, if we want to reduce time to final decision moment, people need to be able to find top candidate, because people don't usually buy 5 washing machines and send 4 back. They just buy one. To be able to find top candidate faster. They also should be able to make decisions better or more successfully. So if they don't, maybe we should run a usability session to understand why and when users fail at decision making. Also, people don't buy when they're frustrated, right? Because the website is slow, it crashes all the time or something like that. So we need to take care of that as well. How does frustration show itself? Well, for example, when they get empty results pages in search, when the website is very slow, when they have some inconsistencies with filters and they don't know how to proceed, right? These are the different things that could be happening there, right? And on the other hand, it also could be that they need to be able to first find some relevant candidates, right? And then move to select only one, right? So they might want to look at a series of candidates first. Okay, does this step make sense for you? Right? So we kind of start from top and we break down, but then eventually I get stuck because I feel like, well, this is all just assumptions. We need some data, we need some research. So I jump down, and this is where you find these purple boxes. These purple boxes are user needs or anything that we know from research, anything that assumptions that we maybe are very strongly believing in, right? Or anything like that. And so, for example, we know from research that 17% of users complained about filtering experience being too slow. Oh, okay, that's helpful. If filters are slow, well, not only is it frustration that we see on the right, but that's kind of a problem right there. So we can say, okay, if this is a problem, how can we fix it? And then we go into these yellow boxes. These are design initiatives right here. These are just ideas that we have. And this is great. Designers are really great at that, right? We have a problem, let's find some solutions. And then we could say, all right, we know how to solve it, let's design it. Well, first, and this is the only important step that I always include now, we need to think about metrics. These blue boxes represent metrics, things that we will measure, because remember, we need to have before and after, otherwise we cannot show any impact. So if we do show before and after, then we need to be able to measure something before and to measure the same thing after. So the blue box represents what we will measure, or what we are measuring today, to assess how successful our design initiatives are. Anybody familiar with SMART goals? Many businesses are speaking about SMART goals, right? And so I'm tapping into that and I say, well, okay, it must be SMART. So it must be a number and it must be time bound and it must be relevant and all of that, right? So, that's a metric right there. And so before we start designing, right, I think about how can we measure it? So if again, 17% of users complain about filtering experience too slow, and we made some changes, what will change actually? Well, let's see what people are doing most of the time. Well, they use five filters a lot. Okay, let's measure the time before and after to set up 5 most frequently used filters successfully in the first session. Right? Okay, let's measure it before with actual users. Let's measure it after with actual users. But it's a bit of a lot of words here to report to senior management. You cannot just come into the senior management and say, well, we're just going to measure average time to set up 5 most frequently used filters successfully in the first session. That sounds a bit weird and a bit of a mouthful. So instead, I transform it by just renaming it into this white box, which are our design KPIs. So right here, I'm saying I'm going to report to senior management every 2 to 3 months for the duration of this project, filtering speed on product listing page and product detail page, right? So here we go. So that's my design KPI that I'm reporting at my team as senior management. Now, what you see here is the whole design initiative of the entire design guild, many different design teams. An individual design team, like maybe yours, will only be working maybe on these 2 boxes, on these 2 columns for a given quarter. But then the other teams will be working on this, and then the other team will be working maybe on this, and then the other team will be working on this. And now all of a sudden, everybody is measuring something. Everybody can report something to their immediate manager. And if you actually track it here, for example, 3 different teams working on these 3 things, you can report time to relevant candidates being reduced. Here you can report time to top candidate being reduced, right? Here you can report the frustration score being reduced, right? And then it goes and propagates all the way up in the same way, right? And before you know it, you have your design KPIs and you have your UX metrics and you have something to reporting to management, which then should be not surprising then that all of a sudden they pay attention because you're tapping right and visualizing, what they care about. And I want to really emphasize this as a last point. I know that I'm running late, right? This is extremely powerful because for once in a lifetime, for a change, what we're trying to do here is to connect the business goals with design initiatives in a way that business understands. And if you show it to your PM, or if you show it to even a management in a presentation about your design intent or what you're actually planning on doing, they will look at you with open eyes, because usually designers don't do that. We basically just explain and visualize the concepts, the ideas, the flows, the screens. That's a different language that we're using here. And that's the language that is much more closer to business, that they understand. Not only business, by the way, also marketing and sales, right? So, I mean, I could go like this forever, but I think I probably shouldn't. So I'm just going to wrap up and then we can jump into questions right here, right? Because in the end, what I showed you, like all these different things, right? There's of course much more than that. And it's a little bit more complicated because you have to do quite a bit of work in there. Oops, hold on, I have to adjust here. This is another thing that I was working on. Here we go. Right. So if you're interested in this or anything like this, we also have put together this little course on measuring UX, which goes into all the fine details, like 10 hours of how to do it from scratch. You don't measure anything, and then we basically learn how to build up this KPI trees, how to measure everything, how to get through these KPI trees, what other things you need to keep in mind, how to choose the right metrics and all that. Oh, it should be video, it should be playing with us, right? How to measure everything and so on and so forth. And also how to report and visualize your impact, right? So I'm just going to drop it in the chat, just in case you're interested. I'm really bad at promoting anything. Sorry, my friends, but I was told that I should do that. Otherwise, people will not notice. So here we go. You have a link, so everything is in order. And I think also just one more thing that I want to mention at this point is that it doesn't matter what you do. Usually it's very, very difficult to get things right. It's just really, really hard to do. So I want to show you just in 1 minute, one final story of my life, which is going to be around 1 minute long. So you can try to measure things, and sometimes it will not work and sometimes it will, but we can still do better. The world isn't satisfying. The companies are often are as well, but we can still do something, and that something can be very impactful. Welcome to my world. I don't know if you can hear the audio. And sometimes things just don't launch. Well, thanks so much for the Parallel Studio for the wonderful video. With these come cats and more cats. And well, thank you so much for having me, Josh, and everyone. And I hope that there were some useful bits here and there. If you have any questions, I'm not running away, so I'm happy to answer any questions that you have here. And yes, I hope that it will be helpful for your work now and in the future. So thanks for listening, everyone.
Thank you so much, Vitaly. That was really interesting. Yeah, and if anyone, I think there might be a question on the chat if you have time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just for one question.
So I'm just going to stop sharing and I'm going to dive into the Zoom chat. I think there was one question that came in earlier. I'm just going to double check. There was one from Praveen 20 minutes ago. So I'm just going to answer that one first. Praveen is wondering, are these to be used in quantitative studies? Is there a way to use them in qualitative studies for a round of research done with 5 participants? So I think that it refers to the task completion rate. In our case, what I try to do is to run qualitative studies. So with task completion rates, when we bring 12 to 15 tasks and we give them to, 15 to 18 people, some of my colleagues do it unmoderated. So it's just basically we send a task and then people perform and they record a screencast basically of what they're doing, right? but I like to be there. I like to be there to be able to, well, first of all, usually the way of how it works is we have two people on the call. We have the participant, and then we have one facilitator. That's a person who is speaking to the user, and then there is a one note taker. Usually, I'm a note taker, right? And so what we do most of the time is we give people tasks one after another. We don't ask them to speak through the experience because this doesn't represent reality. Usually, it's their machine, and they just do whatever they want to do. They can use Google, they can use ChatGPT, they can use Perplexity, whatever. It doesn't matter. But they just do what they do. Our goal is to see how successful they are and how much time they need to complete these tasks, right? And so in the end, though, I like to be able to ask some follow-up questions. And that's something that I'm missing with quantitative studies because you just get a number. Sure, you can still run SUS score and stuff like that, but I like to be able to ask follow-up questions because if I just get the result, I cannot, it kind of stops the conversation. But if I am sitting there and I can monitor what the person is doing and flag it now or later and say, well, can you elaborate a little bit more about why you ended up doing this or selecting that, right? So I would say yes. So typically though, for the task completion rates to be statistically significant and reliable, you need 15 to 18 people. 5 participants, you can identify some trends, but then it's probably not good enough. And this is why I'm saying, depending on the velocity of the team, if you have like a complex project, 5 participants, not great. Ideally, I would say let's make it less frequent, but then with 15 to 18 participants. So we're actually comparing apples to apples.
Thanks for that. Just to follow up on that, would you recommend anything as such for reporting based on a round of research done with 5 participants?
What do you mean? Could you repeat? Could I recommend?
Would you be that answer that you have provided is very clear. However, I want to understand, is there any other metrics that you would recommend, or any of the metrics that you have covered would that you
Yes.
recommend for reporting based on a round of research done with 5 participants?
Yes. So that depends, of course, on the work that the team is doing. So if let's say a team is working specifically on search, I would find the search quality score. Typically, though, I would say CSAT is okay because it's also something that business understands, right? I would also measure SUS. If you feel like SUS with 10 questions is too much, you can also use this UX Lite, which is only 2 questions. This is the one that I showed as well, right? You can run it in a little pop-up feedback questionnaire right after people complete some task or completes particular something in a product. That's usually easy to do. So usually I would go with success rate, success times. I would also go with usually CSAT and SUS. More than 4 you don't need. I don't think that is necessary. If anything, you can just stick to whatever works for you, and that's it.
Okay.
Sure. All right. There is another one from Pravin actually. Measuring time to decision is surely something that business may be interested in, but we cannot necessarily be sure if it is in the best interest of the users. That's true. And very often, some things are outside of our control. That's also something that I should have mentioned. Thank you so much for this question, Pravin, because it might be that UX is great, but the pricing is too high, so people don't buy. They need more convincing. And then you might need to think about maybe we need to bring in testimonials or expert reviews or kind of convince people that they're actually paying for value, right? They're paying for quality here or something similar. It might be that good UX alone is not good enough, that you need to do some marketing there, right? And so this is why this, I call it design KPI tree, but it's really not, because it's kind of experience KPIs or experience metrics. You might want to bring marketing teams into this. So for this KPI tree that I showed, we usually it's not just designers doing it. If I can, I will bring marketing people in, PMs, I would bring engineers in so they actually have a look and can contribute to it as well. Because in the end, it's all a part of the experience. If let's say your performance is really bad and your engineers are really struggling with servers and whatever, then it's not going to help, even if you have the best, I don't know, filters in the world. Right? So it all has to work together, kind of, or be orchestrated together. Great question.
Just on that same point again, is there a way to measure the outcomes for users? I understand time to decision is a business metric at the end of the day, but at the we are designing or developing things or creating products and services for people for helping people achieve certain outcomes through those. Is there a way that we can measure them? Would any of your
Yes.
metrics align with those?
Yes, but it requires to have a very direct line of communication with the users. So for example, if you're working on, let's say, a financial application, and this may be just a stock screener, but we can monitor the market and what's happening. Well, what we need to track is indeed, and this is the best indicator of success, that people have found it successful, useful for them. It's not necessarily if they would recommend or not, although it's a way of framing it. But what I would say is, instead of asking people, would you recommend it to a friend or colleague? I would at least twist it and say, have you recommended our product to a friend or colleague in the last 4 or 6 months? That's better. But what would be even better is to say, have you found real value from this product for you within the last 4 to 6 months? Or even better, if it's, let's say, financial stock screener, have you actually made any money from the insights from our tool or not? And not like on a scale from 1 to 5, but yes or no. And that gives you sort of I guess, a sentiment how successful people were. So there are different kind of levels to that, for sure, right? But I would say the closer you get to what people need to be doing ultimately, the better. Because ultimately, very often people are using a particular product in tandem with many other products, and maybe in parallel using multiple products at the same time. So ultimately, we're looking at them being more successful in general, whatever it is that they want to do. Fantastic question, Brian. Thank you. We should become friends, I think, and talk more often. All right. Excellent. Charlotte is wondering, how do you prioritize what metrics to use when you work on B2B products and have limited access to users? I'm glad that you brought it up, Charlotte. Have a whole section on that in the video course. So let me just show you maybe just 2 slides here. This has indeed been challenging because if you're actually working, let's say, I don't know, in a bank or in healthcare, very often you have very limited resources. You cannot really just go ahead and hold on, and get access to users, right? So what you can do though are things around it. So what I kind of try to do, sorry, there are a lot of words here, right here. There are many things that you cannot do, right? Potentially you cannot do stakeholder interviews, data analysis, user interviews, and so on and so forth. This is often the world in which I find myself as well. Maybe you cannot run any service because there are no users to send to. Maybe you cannot run any sentiment analysis because there is no media presence, no usability testing because of IP concerns, no concept testing because of NDAs, and so on. So what I try to do is to focus on everything around that I can access. So, and this is quite exhaustive, and sorry for so many words on this one page here, but typically what you find is, well, we need to study what people are doing. Maybe there are some reviews or articles of similar tools that people are using and adopting, processes that they're kind of using and adopting. Maybe it's also a domain that we need to just study better, understand what kind of tasks they are doing, right? You can find it in job posts, you can find it in Google Trends, what people are searching for. Maybe there are some service blueprints that already are in place that you can actually build on top of that. If I can't get access to people to speak to people, monitor people, maybe at least I can shadow them a little, or their colleagues, or people who are the closest to them or perform similar tasks. If you maybe could interview colleagues that are closest to them as well, close to the business, right? Maybe you can introduce sort of a customer success group or working group or something, or domain experts, although it's probably a little bit expensive, right? Sometimes you see teams building an internal UX testing lab when they bring in people who are the closest to that audience that you're designing for. And for me then, when it comes to metrics, right, I kind of find it interesting because very often within B2B, you have customers UX and you have employees UX. And with customers UX, well, we kind of know how this works, right? Typically, I'm looking for compliance, right? We're looking for reliability, efficiency, but I actually always speak about access to users through the lens of efficiency. I just want us to be sure that we are providing a service that the end users who we're designing for in the end are efficient in the work that they need to produce, they need to do. And this is where you can track things like this here: failure frequency, application processing time, complaints and bug reporting, self-service usage rate, and a few other things. There are also quite a few standardized assessments for B2B, one of them being HEART, right? But you can also use many others. There's also eNPS for employees, right? And ideally also this part that I kind of briefly mentioned is there as well. And sometimes you will find some engagement surveys being used as well in this case, but it depends on how many users you have. Sometimes you get situations where you have maybe 4 users, and so you basically can only run interviews with them and see how successful they are, right? So that's kind of the issue there. And also sometimes, again, you have on-premise products as well. So that's kind of where we are. Oh, that also answers, I guess, partially Igor's question, right? But in my world, I would say the challenging part really is to sell this idea that the access to users is not a technical consideration from our side, but an important indicator for success of that user and for efficiency of them using our product. Because what happens very often is that we speak about usability being almost like a separate entity that we need to improve for the sake of quality of the product or so, or to help people get things done better and faster. But companies usually care about efficiency. So instead, if you start talking about efficiency most of the time and framing UX metrics as a way to track efficiency, then maybe you'd be in a better place. Another question from Praveen. Not everybody responds to exit surveys that feed into metrics such as SAS, NPS, and CSAT. Would the results therefore be skewed by only people who care to offer feedback or extroverts? I think that depends on the number of people that you are sending it to. So if it's enough people, you just need to find what a significant number is, then you should be okay. But there is always a bias because some people just never participate in things like that. However, there are kind of two extremes. People who are really disappointed, they will express it quite often, unless they are so disappointed that they actually have left already or are leaving soon, right? And then people who are really happy, they will probably also respond, right? The passive ones are the problematic ones because you don't know why they don't necessarily have any particularly positive view of the product. So you always have some bias in there. So you just need to make sure that you have enough people on board. Great question. Thank you so much.
Cool. I think that's all the questions. Thanks so much for that, Vitaly, and taking the extra time as well. Much appreciated.